Space Arena.
Grand Arena.
Saga Podcast. And welcome back to the Saga Podcast, the Space Arena, Ground Arena, where we cover Star Wars Unlimited from the ground up into space. I'm Mr. Ben, and today I'm joined by Banana Crapshoot. Banana, how are you doing?
Doing good. I'm doing well. Excited, as always, to talk about Star Wars Unlimited, so I'm happy to be here. How are you?
I am holding together. It has been a week or two since we last got together. We survived the holidays. I really enjoy. I know the cliche is like, oh, you fight with your family, but actually, I love spending time with my family, both immediate and my extended family. So I don't know if I'm just lucky in that regard. But I had a terrific Thanksgiving, even though it was shot through with illness going around the house. It was still nice to see everybody, the people that we could around the pockets of unwellness. How about you guys? Did
Right.
you have a good holiday?
Yeah, Thanksgiving was good. Yeah, we've been good, man. Been busy, but been good. What games have you been playing? It's been like 3 weeks since we recorded last. What have you been up to on the tabletop?
So my youngest made a comment to somebody. We were visiting a family, and I knew the kid in this other family played Magic, so I engaged him like, "Hey, what do you think about Ixalan? What do you think? Just if you have something you can talk to a kid about, you go to." And Wit kind of chimed in with these comments about how like, "Oh, Versus is a better game," which I agree it is, but like if you're talking to somebody who plays Magic, that's a little bit rude. You know what I mean? And he doesn't know how to play. So on the way home from this, I was like, "Hey, bud, now you have to learn how to play Magic. Because if you're gonna talk trash, you have to at least know what you're talking about." So we've had some fun introducing that game to Wit, and he gets frustrated by the same things that we all do: mana flood, mana screw. It's a 30-year-old game. It shows. He's played a lot of other more contemporary games, um, but introducing him to the game that kind of opened my eyes to this space when I was 14 or so has been really, really fun. I super enjoyed that, and I just wrapped up the end of my competitive tournament for Versus, where it was like X-Men versus Brotherhood, so a theme tournament, which was pretty fun. So those two games have consumed the majority of my time over the last couple weeks. Although I will say, I put in some games on Force Table. As much as I don't really enjoy playing AI, like I'll play AI in video games all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but something about playing against an AI in a card game, I find like it doesn't hold my interest. But I have actually really been pretty impressed with Force Table. I've got in maybe a dozen games or so over the last week, and I found it to be a lot cooler than I was expecting. I think that says a lot about Star Wars Unlimited as a game,
Mm-hmm.
because Hearthstone is a very polished experience, and I don't play that against AI ever. Force Table is great, but it's not super polished, and it still captured my attention for a significant chunk of my weekend last weekend. So, all right, that was long-winded, man. How about you? What have you been playing?
Um, been playing some Star Wars Unlimited. Was at PAX, which we'll talk about. So I got a lot of Unlimited in on Friday. Played some Keyforge over Thanksgiving. My brother-in-law whipped my butt. Some Keyforge. He found at a like a secondhand store, basically, an unopened like 2-player starter of Keyforge from a couple sets ago, like when FFG still had it. And he wanted me to look at the decks, and I looked through and like there's nothing special in the decks. Like if you're familiar with Keyforge, right? There's card rarities, and the whole decks are unique and randomized. And there wasn't any like he didn't have like any rares in the deck, but it was so synergistic that it was like I don't think I forged one key with the deck I played. It was ridiculous. He just like mocked me up. And then played some Battle Ball, which is like a football minis game. That was fun. Demoed a few things at PAX, but yeah, mostly Star Wars Unlimited for me.
Did anything stand out at PAX? Play any new games? Try any prototypes and anything fancy like that?
So Clank has a new box out. If you're familiar with Clank, it's like a deck building campaign, like adventure card game. They have it's called Clank Catacombs, and it's more of what I would describe as a roguelite, right? So it's like you go in and get out, and you do that and instead of having one map, they have map tiles, right? So it's like randomized what your dungeon's going to look like each time you go in, so it adds to the replayability. And the deeper you get, the closer the dragon is to getting you. So you're basically trying to steal from Smog and get out before he catches you. So that was pretty fun. There was a game called Ring of Chaos that was on Kickstarter that was there that I saw. I checked out Soulforge Fusion. I don't know if you're familiar with that at all.
How is that? I've heard some interesting things about that game, and I love all card games apparently.
I'm still,
So I
yeah.
picked it up a couple times at the store. What do you think?
I'm still not sure what I think. I gotta get more games in with it. And actually, so I played. My kid has been playing Pokemon, so I played that with him. And now he's asking me about Digimon because of that card game, and I have cards for that. So now the other night I built 4 Digimon decks so that over the weekend I can teach him how to play the Digimon TCG. So yeah, wrapping him into it. Yeah, I mean,
It's a
most
lot
of
of
my
fun.
time at PAX was spent around the SWU, the SWU stuff. So I did walk around a little bit and checked out a few things, but I wasn't playing demos all day of other games,
Sure. Well, I guess let's dive right into PAX stuff. What was the Star Wars Unlimited presence like there? What sort of stuff was there for you to do? Um, Walk us through it for people who weren't able to be there. Paint a picture.
PAX Unplugged in Philly at the convention center, big convention center, downtown Philly, right next to Chinatown. So I got it. The hall opened at 9. I got there, or the hall opened at 10. I got there at 9 a.m. The line was 3 blocks long to get in for security. Got into security, got in another line to get in after security, and then got in another line to get in the hall. So it was whatever. So I was supposed to be at the FFG booth at 10 to meet with Tyler Parrott, the designer. I only got in there at 10:15 because of all the lines. But as soon as you walked in the main doors for the hall, you see in the air this huge Fantasy Flight Games banner. You see Star Wars Unlimited posters that everybody's seen pictures of on Twitter and Facebook of the big Star Wars Unlimited art with Luke and Vader and stuff. And then they had probably 16 to 20 demo tables set up with 3 to 4 spots per table, so you could get 80 to 100 people in there roughly demoing. Josh Massey, the OP guy, was there. Xander Taylor, the community guy that's been hosting the live streams, was there, and Jeremy and Tyler, the designers, were there. So I met with Tyler, had an interview with him. I didn't record it. I just took notes and had a conversation. I wanted to be kind of laid back. And also it was just me, so I didn't, and I already had a bag full of stuff, so I didn't really want to be lugging around tripods and stuff. So I took some notes while we talked, and then we played a demo game and just had a cool conversation back and forth. Then I demoed the game a few times, taught the game to some people, and then at 3:00 we had a community meetup. That we mentioned it on the podcast before. We talked about it on Discord and Facebook and stuff. So at 3:00 we met in the open play area. Some of the FFG crew came to hang out with us, which was cool. And then, people from the Discord and the community were there. One guy, his name's Dave, from the New York side. He's from New York. He's not on Discord. He wasn't active in the Facebook, and the only reason he knew about it is from our show. So that was pretty cool.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So the one community member.
I got shout out to that guy.
Yeah, shout out to Dave, one of our 2 fans. The one community member, SW Holocron on Discord, created like a draft cube booster pack pull rates based on the information they gave us with all the cards that have been previewed to that point. So he made like 24 booster packs. So at 3:00 at the community meetup, there was the first public
Hold on.
live.
When you say made, did he
made
print these himself?
He printed them, sleeved
like
them
on cardstock or like paper in a sleeve? Or like,
paper
what are
and
we
sleeved
talking
it in
about
front of he printed it and sleeved it in front of Magic cards, and created this draft
I
cube.
love
Right,
it.
so at 3 p.m. on Friday at PAX, the first day of PAX, at the Star Wars Unlimited community meetup, was the first public in-person Star Wars Unlimited draft with proxies.
That's awesome.
It was cool to see. FFG loved it, even though they couldn't participate because playing with proxies.
I mean,
But yeah.
officially, they probably have to say no, don't do that.
Right.
You know?
Officially,
and that's
right.
okay.
But they took pictures because they thought it was awesome, which it was. So that was cool hanging out with some people. I got a couple comments on the name of the show and stuff. So handed out the Space Arena, Ground Arena poker chips to everybody that came up and said hi, and then I handed them out to the FFG crew as well. Had them sign my Saga playmat, and my
That's awesome.
and my Vader and Luke's. I had all 4 of them sign it. So, yeah, so that was cool. But my interview with Tyler, I'll go over the talking points with that. So one of the things.
Hold
I
up
asked
one
him,
second. Before
okay.
we get to that, I have a couple questions with the stuff you went over. When you talked about demo tables, are these the same demo decks that they had at Gen Con?
Yep.
Or was there, given that we've seen so many more cards, so it's still just the Luke Vader,
they're like 30
cards
card
each, I
decks.
think?
Yeah, they're like 30 cards each, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was the same demo decks, the same promos. But yeah. And I will say it was cool being that like it's in Philly, right? So you get that South Jersey crew. So a lot of those people that I would see at events for Star Wars Destiny, right, were there trying out Star Wars Unlimited, right? So seeing all those faces was very cool. It was, cool catching up with people that I haven't seen since like 2019,
Kind of like a reunion.
Yeah, it was neat. So the one thing I asked them about was one design feature that they tried out that was cut and didn't make it into like the final build of Star Wars Unlimited. And the one thing he mentioned is that one of the earlier versions of the game, leaders leveled up similar to like versus system. So that was one version of the game that he said that it became too like finicky with everything else going on. And it was too hard to track, and then they went away from that. But at some point, the leaders, and he said also like that you don't necessarily have in Star Wars a character powering up like instantly, like other than like a Rey in like the Rise of Skywalker. Nobody really like goes from like normal to Super Saiyan. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't really happen in Star Wars. So they said it was better because it didn't. If your character is a snapshot of that character in time, having them level up doesn't really make sense. So, yeah. I asked him if
I'm surprised that they would be publicly forthright with discarded mechanics. In a very real way, mechanics that didn't make it into the set we're working on now are mechanics that could make it into a future set. So maybe you want to play that a little close to the vest. Given that he's willing to say, hey, here's the thing we tried, I wonder if that's territory they'll ever revisit. I have to imagine probably not, given that he's willing to label it as, hey, this is a thing that we decided not to do. Still very cool that they sort of flirted with that versus 2 PCG territory, because I understand it doesn't fit with the thematics of what they're trying to do in Star Wars Unlimited, but the idea of having a thing on board that's weak and making it stronger, there's cool play patterns to be found in there. So I hope while maybe they abandoned the idea of leaders leveling up, I hope they didn't totally abandon the idea of experience or improving your cards. I guess we have that sort of in the form of upgrades, I suppose.
Upgrades and experience tokens, right? I think maybe that's what that shifted to is
Mm-hmm.
instead of having that mechanic tied to leaders, just have it as +1/+1 tokens, right? Because the wing leader gives tokens,
Sure.
Tarkin gives tokens, right? Like Oprah, everybody's getting tokens. So, but yeah, I will say it was really cool. He was really forthright with a lot of stuff. Some things he had to check on before he could give me an answer. So,
Fair.
yeah. Another thing I asked him about is if the 2 lanes, the space and ground arenas, if that was always like a thing that they started with, or like how did they come across that, and if like the old Star Wars TCG that had the multiple arenas was kind of like the inspiration for that. And he said that yeah, they always planned on having, I guess, whenever one of the earlier builds of the game, once they established the 2 arena format, they basically never went away from it. And a big reason was because like people said that like he was a big like community member and player of the Star Wars LCG before he was a designer for FFG. So in the Star Wars LCG, like you could have like Chewbacca fighting a Star Destroyer, right? And like there was people that didn't like how abstract and ridiculous that was. And I said, well, Chewbacca did have a moon thrown on him, right? In Legends, like that's how he died. They dropped a moon on him. So I mean, if he can fight a moon, he can fight a Star Destroyer. And then I said also in the last Star Wars film we had there was people riding horses on a Star Destroyer. So Star Wars is already pretty abstract as it is, So, but yeah, so basically, once they tried out multiple lanes, it stuck.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah,
I feel like it's for people who are fans of the property, it is a self-evidently good idea to have ground battles and outer space battles. That's sort of what Star Wars is.
yeah, yep,
With a dash of space wizards, I guess.
yeah. We talked about sideboarding a little bit, because I brought up that we were talking about like variants in card games and like how you get to like the 50 card decks and like 3 per like versus like 60. We were talking about like deck size and stuff like that, and it shifted to talking about variants, right? And how you need variants in card games, but it's like how much variance is too much and how much is too little. And then that I said, well, that kind of goes into sideboards. And I said, now my co-host might disagree, but I personally, I like what sideboarding brings to a game for not only what it does for deck building, but it's like another game within the game, and it's another way for people to express player skill in like as a part of deck building, kind of. So he kind of agreed with that, and he's a big fan of sideboarding. So yeah, just thought that was interesting. I did ask about FFGs.
Was that a flex?
That was
Did
a
you
flex.
just flex?
That was a
Oh,
flex.
I just thought it was interesting
Yeah.
that the game designers like sideboards,
Yeah.
Okay.
I asked about, so like obviously FFG's reputation in the trading card game spot is not the greatest when it comes, right, because of Star Wars Destiny. And I said, and I know you guys are aware of this, but I was like, what would you have to say to those people that are hesitant to buy into Star Wars Unlimited because of the past? And he basically said that FFG is ran by different people, right? The people running the studio now are card game players. They're not board game players or board game designers. The people running FFG are card game players that have played card games and designed card games, so they are aware and know what it takes to make a card game successful. No other game in FFG's history has had the resources assigned to it as Star Wars Destiny, which we have heard before. But there's so this is something Josh Massey told me when I was talking to him, the guy from Organized Play Director, that even Asmodee is super excited for Star Wars Unlimited and has like FFG has Asmodee's full support for Star Wars Unlimited, and they've never like necessarily had that before. And FFG never has really had a proper trading card game. Like Star Wars Destiny was somewhat a card game, but it was somewhat a gimmick, right? It was like a card and dice game. It wasn't a proper trading card game. If I buy a booster pack and it only has 5 cards in it, right? Like that's not really a trading card game. So it's kind of like Star Wars Pocket.
Trading card adjacent.
Yeah. So we talked about how FFG is a different company. It's ran by card players. This is their focus. Their main focus is trading card games. This trading card game is their focus as a studio. So, there you go. I knew everything they're saying has been great, and it totally seems like everything is lining up properly. Like GameGenic's been involved from the start with accessories. OP's been involved from the start. The designers are involved in the marketing and community outreach part. Like it's everything. Everybody's working together. It seems like much more in this game than they ever have before. Where it's like the designers do this and marketing does this, and there's no crossover, right? So then you'd have people writing articles about games that have no idea how the game works, and you could tell when you would read FFG articles that whoever wrote this has no idea what's going on with this game. So to see that that's going away, and they're all working together, and everyone's going towards this common thing, which is to make Star Wars Unlimited successful, is very encouraging. Touch briefly on the uniqueness rule. I just basically said I like where they ended up with it. I said I didn't agree with it at first, but after you explained it and we went through it, it makes sense. And in the proxy games I've been playing, it feels good. Like it's cool. So I also talked to him about how if you follow him on Twitter, Tyler is a Magic player. So I asked how much of his time playing Magic influences his design of Star Wars Unlimited, and how do you prevent yourself from just making Star Wars Unlimited Magic in space. So he talked about how any card game basically shares from any card game, so you're obviously going to have mechanics that are shared, but he doesn't say, oh, this is from Magic, I want to bring it in Star Wars Unlimited. He said, how can I make that certain mechanic and change it to make it work for Star Wars Unlimited, but not copy paste it, but make it work in a more interesting, unique way for our game. Which I think that happens with anybody, right? Like any designer that's designed multiple games, there's going to be similarities, or people that have played games are going to. Everybody takes from each other, right? I mean, Disney Lorcana is just a carbon copy of Rush of Icor, right? Anybody that's played Rush of Icor knows.
Allegedly.
Yeah. So that wasn't really like a surprise, but I just wanted to see if I could get something interesting there.
So it seems like the trend of FFG saying all the right things continues.
Yeah.
So
it's genuine.
That is really encouraging in the sense that you can't say the right things without knowing them. So we know they know the stuff that we want them to, with the odd wobble here and there. I get that some people are super upset about the uniqueness rule. I'm tired of talking about it, honestly. But there are, I only mention it again to illustrate, there are areas where individual people might poke or prod. You know, Dan and I kind of both had a little bit of a harsh take on like pack distribution. I guess to that end, I'm sort of interrupting my own diatribe here, but how did pack distribution feel in an actual draft game? How many people were playing in that first ever Star Wars Unlimited draft?
6 people played in it. And I didn't play, I watched. Like I wanted to take it all in and watch. And it looked like a lot of fun. Like there was a Thrawn out there was Sabine out there was Leia, Tarkin, 2 Tarkins. There's 2 Tarkins, a Leia, a Sabine, a Thrawn. I'm missing one, I forget what it was.
It's like a good spread though.
Yeah, it was a good spread. The decks like it worked. Like you could tell, even with half the cards, a little more than half the cards, like it worked. It functioned. You had decks that could do things. So like it worked. I'm excited to see what that looks like with a full card pool. you know.
Oh, definitely.
Um,
So at the end of the day, I feel like this is all encouraging stuff.
yeah,
While there are nitpicks here and there, hey, I wish this was this way. I wish this was a little better. Um, I wish the game was already out. That sort of stuff.
mhm.
Little minor things. Overall, the trend of them telling us what we want to hear, I think, continues, and I hope the follow through is there.
Me too. I asked Tyler about different products in the future, as in, I told him I'm a big fan of the boss battle thing, right? Final Fantasy does it, Versus does it. Tyler said he's a big fan of the one versus many multiplayer formats. So I said, well,
I like hearing that.
look into it, like so. Maybe in the future that's something we could possibly see. I don't know. I tried to whisper that because that's something I'd love to see, like a Vader boss battle
Yeah,
or like
me
a
too.
Palpatine boss battle. Like that'd be cool. So then
Star Destroyer boss battle.
I tried to get what rotation's gonna look like set rotation. We know set rotation is coming. I was trying to get like how many sets, like what are we working with? He wanted to tell me. He asked the OP guy, and he said, "I'm not allowed to tell." So, and then I talked to. Then when I was done with talking with Tyler, I was talking to Josh Massey, the guy from OP, and I was trying to get it out of him directly, and he wouldn't budge. All he told me was, "Yep, we're gonna have rotation." But he did drop a little nugget on me that he said, "I don't know if we've said this publicly," so my ears perked up instantly. So I don't know if this is basically news or not, but when he was talking, we were talking about like the different events, and I said I was glad to hear in their competitive OP stream how like the events aren't going to be tied to cons, right? Because like having Destiny Nationals hosted at a minis war game convention in Washington D.C. didn't make any sense. And like if you want to go to Gen Con, then you're stuck like playing Worlds at Gen Con and you can't actually enjoy the convention, right? So having these things outside of that was encouraging to me. And I said, he's like, well, also like don't expect to come to Roseville, Minnesota for Worlds. So traditionally FFG has hosted all their Worlds at Minnesota. It sounds like for Star Wars Unlimited, it's not going to be in Minnesota, and it's not always going to be in the United States. It's going to be a rotating location and rotating country for Worlds, the Galactic Championship. So, yeah, I thought that was cool. And they didn't. I don't think they said that in the stream. But there you go.
I mean, as someone who lives in Iowa, I would be okay with major events being in Minnesota.
Right.
Like that sounds cool to me.
Yeah, go get some cheese curds
But in the interest of a holistic approach to the game, if it's gonna be a global game and there's gonna be competition everywhere in the world, then I like the idea that FFG wants to bring the competition to where the players are, rather than always expecting the players to come and to the US and be super US centric. Like,
well,
yes, I personally benefit from it being US centric, but I want the game to succeed globally and not just do what's best for me,
And how many of those global players do you really get to come to Minnesota?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Fair.
but yeah, and then it was cool meeting the people from FFG that I interact with like on Twitter and Facebook, and everybody I asked all of them like, what do you guys think of the community so far? Overall, Star Wars Unlimited. What they see on Facebook and Discord and Twitter, they're very encouraged by. They already have like more excitement for this game than like any other game they've had. And it only comes out in March. But everyone is super happy with like the Discord community and the Facebook community and like how it's going. So that was encouraging to me as someone that helps facilitate those communities. That was encouraging to hear that, everyone was blown away also by the amount of websites, databases, podcasts about a game that comes out in March.
Yeah.
It's pretty insane. So
Imagine where it's going to be in like April, May next year.
speed.
Like triple?
Yeah.
Like you have to assume once it's actually out, there's going to be an explosion of people going, "Oh, I like this game. I want to make content too."
Mm-hmm. So the
And good, bring it on. Like more the merrier.
and the big thing I know everyone's dying to know is that yes, Tyler beat me in our demo game. I was playing Vader.
What was he
He
on?
was playing Luke, and I was playing Vader. And basically with the demo decks, as the Luke player, if you have Chewbacca on the turn you deploy Luke, like you're gonna win because you can double shield Chewbacca that turn, and you basically can't eat through that as the Vader player. It's just it is what it is. So as soon as I saw Chewbacca come out, I was like, that's GG. Like that's game there. But yeah, so then taught some people the game. Played a few demos, hung out at the community meetup. Yeah, it was cool. It was cool. I told everyone I appreciate all their hard work, and everything they're doing. I'm excited for the future of this game. That's it. That's my PAX recap for me. I was only there Friday.
Well, that's pretty cool, man. There's a lot of encouraging things that come out of that. I think that it's pretty neat that you got to bear witness to a moment in SWU history, the
First ever.
unofficial first public draft.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I'm curious how much that dude spent in printing costs.
I said
Who'd you say that was?
SW
Holocron?
Yeah. I
Yeah,
told
shout out to that service to the community.
Yeah, I hope he printed those out at work and wasn't using his own toner for that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's Staples. It's like $2 a page these days, man. That adds up.
Yeah.
All right. Well, did you have any other not maybe I know you said that was most of your Star Wars Unlimited stuff. Did you have any other PAX thoughts before we move into talking about Color Pie?
PAX is a cool event. Next year, Xander said, look forward to events. So like they're not going to have big events, but they'll have something there to do for Star Wars Unlimited. And they're looking forward to actually being able to play cards with community members instead of watching us. And having drafts with us and so it sounds like PAX is going to be like a community celebration type thing. So I'm looking forward to that because it's an hour and a half away from me.
Very cool.
But yeah, PAX is a cool event. I encourage everybody to go if you get a chance. 3 days of fun, even though I was only there for a day. But that's all I got, man.
All right. Well, I guess we'll move on to our next topic. So I have been for a while now wanting to tackle the topic of color identity or the color pie within Star Wars Unlimited. Now, the fewer cards we have, the harder this is to write about. So as more and more cards came out, I feel more comfortable and kind of confident in my assessments of the factions. Now, everything is subject to a little bit of change and adjustment as we see more cards, but regardless, I think having kind of a basic idea of where the factions are at is not that difficult given the card pool that we have at this time. So just to hit a couple of like core ideas, like the big concepts within this, the general idea of class identity is you don't want to have 4 different factions or however many in this game it's 4 that are all doing the exact same thing. Because at that point, if there's no differentiation, it's kind of like, well, what does it matter if my cards are blue or yellow if all these different factions have the ability to do everything? So a huge part of color identity and faction identity is not just the things that the class can do, it's the things that they can't do. So generally the way I think about this is I break it down into sort of 3 buckets. There's our core concepts, our core themes, and these are going to be the things that the class is just rotten with. As an easy example, Shield, Sentinel, these are things that are just all over the place in Vigilance. Then we have sub-themes, which are going to be stuff that shows up within the faction, but maybe it's not as focused on. So if we've got 10 cards, maybe 5 of them would be on theme, maybe 3 of them would be like on a sub-theme. That's a really crude kind of mathematical example, but that's the general idea. So kind of a sub theme in command would be access to a little bit of sentinel, a little bit of ambush, but these aren't the main core things within that class identity. And finally, I would call these flaws or lacks. These are going to be the stuff the class doesn't have. So when you take the core ideas, the sub themes, and the flaws, and you lump all of that together, that's what gives you your individual class identity for each one of these factions. So I do want to break down each faction one at a time and kind of go through what I see as each of their class identities. But before I monologue the whole time here, I wanted to throw it to you, Banana. Do you have any input on the idea of class identity and the kind of concepts we're going to tackle here?
I think you covered it pretty well. I think anybody that's played card games kind of understands the concepts we're going with, right? Like color identity and magic. I guess versus system doesn't necessarily have that, right? It's a little different there. That's more like
It is a little
that's a
different.
little more like team or faction oriented, right? I guess I don't really have anything good to add here. I think you covered it
I
pretty
suppose
well.
prefacing this with, hey, if you're a longtime card player, some of this is probably going to sound obvious to
Mhm.
you. But in my head, I'm thinking about, let's break this down for somebody who maybe hasn't spent as much time in card games. Maybe they're trying to get their feet under them. Hey, I'm a Star Wars fan. I want to play Star Wars Unlimited. Where do I start? This is the kind of topic that it's going to be here for most of the rest of the show. So the way that these core themes and sub themes are broken down, again, is going to be access to keywords, access to specific effects. So I guess we'll just start with the Vigilance faction. Now, I think one way to get a perspective on what these factions are doing is to look specifically at each card or each faction's class card. Now, for Vigilance, it's called Vigilance, and this is a trend that's going to continue across the rest of the classes. So just to run down what the Vigilance card actually does, it lets you discard cards from your opponent's deck, heal damage from a base, defeat a unit with 3 or less remaining hit points, or give a shield to a unit. So this gives you kind of an overview of what Vigilance is going to do. Now, in my opinion, the core themes of this subclass of this faction are generating shields, putting out sentinels, units with big butts, large defense stats, and access to healing. This is the main thing that you are going to get access to if you choose to put blue cards into your deck. To a lesser degree, there's going to be removal spells, but a lot of what Vigilance has is direct kill spells. So much like the Vigilance card that I just mentioned, it's going to be defeat a unit with 3 or less, or defeat a unit that matches these specific conditions, but not deal 3 damage, not hit something for 6. It also has a little bit of draw in the faction, and the things that Vigilance is really lacking, again, damage-based removal, the ability to put numbers specifically onto something. You don't find any search effects here, and frankly, the units are kind of lacking in the attack stat department. So overall, Vigilance is a faction that is going to be very defensive, very hunkered down, the ability to erase damage that your opponent deals, and units that are going to stick to the board by virtue of their large defense stats overall. So, what are your thoughts on Vigilance as a faction, Banana?
Yeah, I think looking at the card Vigilance gives you a really good idea of what you're going to find in that aspect. You're definitely going to find Sentinel, you're going to find Shield, you're going to find Healing. Those are the 3 things I think of. Access to Sentinel, access to Healing, and access to Shields. They also, it's interesting to note, like, I also think of them as kind of like a control faction because they are, with how defensive it is, they like looking to play the long game. Like they have the upgrade Entrenched that they can play on your, like if I'm playing Vigilance, I can play Entrenched on your dude, and now it can't attack the base anymore, right? So I've controlled that unit, or prevent your win condition because you can't attack my base. Their removal, like you said, is direct but is conditional, right? Like Vanquish, like straight up defeat something, but it can't be a leader. Takedown has to be 5 or less remaining HP. The Vigilance card has to be 3 or less. So yeah, I see them as defensive and controlling. They only have one card that searches for anything, but it is, you can find any card you want. So that is interesting. But yeah, I think defense and control when I look at Vigilance.
All right, so we're going to go from probably the slower, tankiest faction in the game to the opposite end, aggression. So to start analysis of this faction, I'll again look at the aggression event card. The effects that you get to choose on this one are the ability to draw a card, defeat 2 upgrades, ready a unit with 3 or less power, or deal 4 damage to a unit. It's the core themes of what you're going to be doing in aggression really well. So the big ideas in the aggression faction are chunk damage, splash damage, kill spells, large attack stats. This is a faction that wants to turn right, and it has lots of ways to kill you and the units that you're putting in between the aggression player and your base. In order to fund all of this damage, to get access to all of these kill spells and these units with large attack stats, there is a sub theme within the aggression faction of draw. There's also a lot of units that have abilities that trigger on attack and ways to ready their guys. So this faction is all in on pushing lots of damage numbers across the board at you. Now, this does come at the expense of not having shields, not having sentinels, not having heal, not having exhaust effects. So there's really nothing controlly or defensive in aggression. It's just full on turn right, deal damage, remove stuff from the board, and then refill your hand and do it again. At least that's the way I look at the aggression faction. What are your thoughts on aggression?
I love aggression. Personally, it's just more of a lifestyle. But yeah, big damage, turn right. But what's interesting is a lot of the big damage it's conditional, right? The units don't necessarily start with big damage, right? First Legion Snowtrooper is a 2-drop. It's a 2/3, but if you're attacking a dude that already has damage on it, it becomes a 4/3 and gains overwhelm. So, like Fifth Brother is a 2/4. On attack, he can deal damage to himself and another unit, and then gain raid 1. A lot of on-play effects that deal damage, right? Imperial Interceptor deals damage. Vader's Lightsaber deals damage if it's played on Vader. Fallen Lightsaber deals damage to everybody in the ground unit on attack if it's on a Force unit. Palpatine comes down, deals 6 damage, has overwhelm. Yeah. And lots of raid, right? Like Green Squadron A-Wing has raid 2. Red 3 has raid 1 and gives every other heroism unit raid 1. The Cantina dude that's arm wrestling has raid 2. The Partisan Insurgent gets raid 1 if there's another aggression unit. Yeah. And then so open fire just straight up deals 4 damage to anybody. Doesn't matter. Direct damage, turn right, hit you in the face. The big damage numbers are there, but it's conditional. Like it comes with a thing to get the bigger damage. Yeah. I'm a big fan of aggression. When I think of aggression,
Yeah, I also like turning right and taking names
Yeah.
in a lot of card games.
I think of raid, right? A direct damage and stuff benefits on attacking, right? You get your benefits from attack and aggression.
So I guess now we're going to kind of swing back the other direction to the other, or I guess all the factions are a little bit more slowy and controlling compared to aggression. And we're going to take a look at command. So I'm going to start by looking at the command event card. The different modes that this card has available are giving 2 experience tokens to a unit. A friendly unit deals damage equal to its power to a non-unique enemy unit. You can put this event into play as a resource, or you can return a unit from your discard pile to your hand. So, at the risk of repeating myself, this is again a card that kind of hits on the core themes of the faction. So, to my mind, the most important, the singular thing about command is ramp. Like ramp, ramp, ramp. This, and I guess if we're trying to make this friendly to new players to card games, ramp means getting more resources out than you should have for the turn you're on. So if you can play a 6-cost card on turn 4, you have ramped at some point throughout the course of this game. And that can be a really fun thing to do. Playing stuff that's much bigger than what your opponent is able to have access to is one way that you can overpower them. And Command has access to another effect that can potentially allow that in the form of XP counters. So these tokens give +1/+1 to any unit that they are attached to. And while it is one XP counter by itself is a small buff, these things do add up and stack and give you the ability to swing up. For, maybe I have a 2-cost unit, but with a couple XP counters, he's big enough that I can take out your 4-drop. That's the kind of stuff that you like being able to do with the buffing of your units. There's also a lot of access to ramp within, or I'm sorry, draw within this faction. So the ramp, the XP counters, and the draw are kind of the core identity, the core theme to Command, and they have access to a little bit of ambush, a little bit of sentinel, a little bit of restore, a little bit of search, and even the interesting thing with the Command faction is even the effects that they kind of lack, the black holes, the blind spots within the faction, it's not totally a black hole. So, for example, Command does have access to some Sentinel and some damage effects, but they're conditional. Like you mentioned, some of the bigger damage with aggression is conditional on getting the board set up a certain way. That's certainly true with some of the things that Command has. So while they may have access to these damage effects or these Sentinel cards, they're not clean. It's not you just put it into play and it is what it is. You have to jump through some hoops. You have to do some things to get there. There's also not a lot of ready or exhaust access. So manipulation of stuff on your opponent's board, those kind of disruption effects, that's again something that the Command faction really lacks. So this is going to be the faction for somebody who wants to build really big things, but maybe it's going to be a little bit more linear and a little bit more predictable without any access to these disruptive effects on your opponent's board. How do you feel about the Command faction, Banana?
If you look at aggression as more of like a go wide, play lots of things that are smaller, right? Command, I think, is more of a go tall strategy. If you're looking at the damage race where you're gonna play bigger things, right? There's a lot of big things in Command with there's like 3 Star Destroyers. There's a big AT-AT. There's Home 1. There's lots of big vehicles, and then you have access to stuff like Overwhelming Barrage, which gives a unit +2/+2, and then you can deal damage equal to that power to units, right? They don't have removal spells. They have Overwhelming Barrage, which is a buff, and then you deal damage equal to that. Like the Devastator, when played, deals damage equal to the number of resources you have. So ramping into that card allows you, right? You get a huge payoff for that. I think all the aspects, some of the stuff they kind of do, but they do it differently. Like aggression, just straight up, you play an event to draw a card. The card draw here is like attached to a unit, right? So like the Patrolling V-Wing is how you draw a card. They don't get direct damage like Open Fire, and they don't have straight removal like Takedown or Vanquish, but they have like Overwhelming Barrage, and they have tactical advantage to buff a unit. So they're about buffing, going big, and then dealing damage that way.
All right. So our last class breakdown. I'm aware that heroism and villainy exist, but that's a conversation for another day. We're just looking at the core factions today. Finally, we come to Cunning. Now, just based on the name alone, this was a faction that I thought I was going to be very fond of. And once we started to see the cards, it confirmed my suspicions that I am going to be a yellow player in this game. So looking at the Cunning event, this gives you 4 modes to choose from, like all the other faction-specific events. This lets you return a non-leader unit with 4 or less power to its owner's hand, give a unit +4 attack for this phase, exhaust up to 2 units, or an opponent discards a random card from their hand. So from this card, we can kind of see what the Cunning faction is wanting to do. This is the Trixie, this is the Loki faction. So we're exhausting things. We're readying our units and getting multiple attacks with things we shouldn't have been able to. We have bounce effects. Bounce meaning returning something from in play to your hand if you're not a long-time card game player. There's attack events here that allow you to attack your opponent in ways they might not affect. And I think very importantly to this faction, the Saboteur keyword is present. Sub-theme, there's a little bit of ambush, a little bit of sentinel, a little bit of shield, and the big hole in the Cunning faction is removal of all types. Yes, bounce is sort of like a removal, but it's almost like a layaway plan on dealing with that threat next turn rather than true removal. There's also not clean draw. There's some draw, but there's again hoops you have to jump through, and those tasty search cards that let you make sure you have exactly the right thing that you're looking for. That's not something you're finding a lot in the Cunning faction. So if I had to kind of sum up where Cunning in a way is the faction that I feel like has the least clear identity, because so much of what it's doing is reactive rather than proactive. Vigilance is tanking up and being very defensive. Command is trying to get big, tall units and be very expensive. Aggression is, well, trying to be very aggressive. And Cunning is kind of being tricksy and messing with you and making it so your plan isn't working out exactly the way you want it to. And then, oops, surprised, I readied my guy and attacked twice, game over. So Cunning, you remember that scene in Thor where, like, at the beginning, the fight breaks out and you see these guys, these frost giants attacking Loki, and then actually, oh, he tricked them and they attacked and fell off the cliff and he was hiding behind a thing. That I feel like Cunning as a faction is exactly that moment. It's trying to misdirect your opponent towards something that isn't going to impact your plan while you come around behind and get them over here. And I really like these normally this is blue. Like in Magic, these are the blue cards. So I'm very excited about the Cunning faction. I like indirect play patterns. What are your thoughts on Cunning?
I really enjoy Cunning overall. I like where it's at. So what's interesting? So like yellow's discarding effects is discarding from hand, right? You're messing with your opponent's the cards in their hand. The Vigilance discarding is coming from the top of the deck. So they both discard, but they do it in different ways. Whereas Command buffs a thing for the phase, most of the time in Cunning, you're buffing your dude for that attack, right? Surprise attack, +3 for that attack. Snapshot reflexes is an upgrade. They get +1/+1, and they get to attack. Shoot first, +1 for that attack, right? And they don't have their removal, I'd say, it's soft mitigation. You're not removing the units, but you're removing them from being effective that turn because you're exhausting them. Lots of exhaust effects, right? Between Asteroid Sanctuary, Leia comes in and can exhaust things. Yeah, I just feel like, I don't know, I like everything Yellow has going on. I think it's fun. No Good to Me Dead is ridiculous. Boba Fett, Bosk, like all the good stuff, man. Like the Millennium Falcon's awesome. Like lots of good stuff in Cunning. Lots of good stuff in all these factions. But yeah, they are all about doing something now, right? And getting the payoff instantly, in my mind.
So the kind of conclusion to breaking down the cards based on their faction identity, I think there's one step further that we should go. Because, all right, we know aggression is where the aggressive cards are. We know command is where the big monsters are going to be and the big beefy tall guys. But what do we do with that? And from the perspective of faction identity. So I think of it as, and I guess maybe I could allow for three, a hybrid of the two, but there's two main paths here. There's what I think of as doubling down, and there's patching holes. So let's say the faction that I want to play in is aggression.
Smart choice.
I got a cool new leader out of a pack. I want to build an aggression. So I can look at trying to choose a faction that's now I could go all aggression, of course, but for the purposes of this thought experiment, we're going to mix another faction in. Now, I could look at trying to maybe plug some of the holes in my faction. Maybe I want to splash in some blue cards so I can get a little bit of access to shield, so that way my wide board of small units is a little bit stickier. Maybe I would like to have a little bit of the healing that the Vigilance faction would give me access to. Or maybe I would rather draw some extra cards, have a few extra resource points available, the ability to buff up my guys with XP tokens and splash in that command faction instead. So in both of these cases, what I'm really doing is trying to patch the hole. I'm trying to plug the weakness within the aggression faction by using cards from somewhere else to sort of shore up that weakness. Now we could flip that. You know, you look at something like Vigilance, if you're going to splash some, say, red cards into Vigilance, Open Fire seems like a delicious one. The lack of damage-based removal in Vigilance can be essentially erased by having a red base to go with your blue leader and putting some of these good direct damage aggression cards in. Now, the other angle is you can totally just double down on the thing that you're already good at. So the most obvious way of doing this is going yellow base, yellow leader, and then you get to run your faction identity card. That's clearly doubling down. But you don't necessarily have to do that in a one color deck. You could, for example, I think we've talked about this exact combination on the show before because we're both fans of this kind of stuff, but combining red and yellow together is going to give you access to those disruption effects that aggression doesn't have. And maybe you get to force your army of small attackers through a little bit more easily. With the red damage spells kind of making up for yellow's lack of removal, these two factions can help each other out and patch the holes, or you can select cards that specifically double down on the things that that faction is already good about. And of course, probably the correct answer is going to be a hybrid of the two. There's going to be specific themes that you're like, okay, I need this cunning card because it supports what aggression's doing. But then maybe this other cunning card kind of shores up the weakness in my aggressive deck. That's probably when the rubber meets the road in the reality of deck building, that's probably going to be where you end up. But the way I approach deck building is generally to have my big ideas. Is this going to be all out aggression, or is this I want to play with an aggressive leader and I want to make sure that he's a little bit stickier and a little bit more durable, so I'm going to splash some of those blue cards in. So those are the kind of two approaches that I would take, using the faction identity as a prism to kind of inform those choices.
Yeah, for sure. Man, I think the way aspects work with deck building between the leaders and the base really give a lot of flexibility to how you construct your deck, and like you said, shoring up those weaknesses, because you can do like you said and have the aggression with the attackers and then like shore up your weakness. So like aggression and command, you can buff your dudes, you can have some big dudes, and then you can have some little dudes with some direct damage because command doesn't really have that direct damage. But at the same time, well, you might not be as survivable, so you go vigilance, you give yourself a little bit of sustain to go if you want to go a little more mid range. So I think there's just so much flexibility with deck building within the aspect system that you really got to think about what your game plan is and how are you going to win this game. It's not just, okay, I'm going to play with these cards because I like what this faction does. You have to think about, what is my game plan? How do I win this game? And what cards do I need to throw in here to make that happen? If you're playing competitive, if you are playing casually at home, kitchen table with your kids, and you just want to play for theme, go all in on whatever that theme is, right? If you want to play all rebels, if you want to play all Imperials, if you want to play all bounty hunters, that stuff's in there, and you're probably going to find that if you want to play all bounty hunters, you're probably going to be looking at, you're going to be playing Cunning, right? If you want to play rebels, you're probably going to be playing that. They have a pretty good mix, but yeah, I think it depends what you want to do, but knowing where you can find this stuff to put in your deck is definitely important, in understanding how the aspects want to function both with the other aspects and within the aspect itself.
I mean, when it comes down to it, you as a deck builder are absolutely allowed to put anything into your deck that you want to. And I think that's cool. Like, the fact that you could put a card into a deck that would make me go, dude, are you crazy? I can put cards in my deck that people think are ridiculous too. And that is a fundamental part of what I find exciting and interesting about playing these types of card games. So nothing I've said here is meant to be like an iron fast rule, like you have to think about the aggression fact. This is all just sort of tools to build out the framework for what kind of player are you? Like, these are the things I think about when I'm building decks, and these are the ways I engage with the game. And I hope that's helpful to people, but it's certainly not the only correct answer. You can definitely think about building your deck theme first, which is something I almost never do, but it's totally a valid way to have fun with these games.
I normally go for I want to build with this leader for Star Wars Unlimited. It's like, I'm going to build a deck with this leader. What do they do? What's their ability? How do I use that to win the game? And then I go from there and add the cards that help support that or benefit from that. Right.
Often what my strategy is, I pick the main character, I pick the leader that I want to build around, and then I start going through my binder and I have 7 other ideas for different decks, and I end up with like 10 piles of cards on the table that are all like different decks in varying states of, I don't even call them being built. It's just stacks of cards everywhere.
I can't wait to have that problem with Star Wars Unlimited.
Yeah, it is pretty fun. Deck building, I have no hate for people who get on the internet and when I was coming up in like old verses, net decking was like a dirty word. Like somebody's a net decker, like that was like a pejorative. And now I just think that's so silly. Like if somebody else took the time to figure out a cool deck and they want to share what they discovered, what they built, great. Good for them. Good for the people who are able to stand on that guy's shoulders and get a cool deck that they can go play with their kids or take to their local game night. So I have no problem with any of that. But in my heart of hearts, I love building decks, man. I love having the entire table just covered with cards. Oh wait, where was that one? Oh, it's in that pile. Um, I don't know. My wife's super big fan of that, but that's some of my favorite things to do with card games. I mean, playing them is great too. Don't get me wrong, but deck building is certainly the thing. I think inarguably, I have spent more time on that aspect of the hobby than the actual playing of games. Like just in terms of the time it takes to build a deck compared to play a game, I think that has to be true.
Yeah. Do you find yourself doing that in every game, like regardless of the game? Like,
No. There are some games where I don't build my own decks at all and I just play. Hearthstone is one of them. I almost never build my own deck in Hearthstone. I mean, I have. Like when I was playing a lot of Hearthstone every day, all the time, I certainly occasionally built a deck, but for the most part, that was a game where it was just like, hey, give me cards. Final Fantasy is another one. I almost only play the precons or decks that my buddies hand me. Um, and it's nothing. It's just hours in the day. Like if I had infinity time, I'd probably build decks for Final Fantasy too, because I actually really like that game, but I only have X amount of shelf space and X amount of hours in the day. Uh, so the games that I'm more casual a fan of, I'm less likely to build decks for. But it's a bandwidth issue more than anything else.
what's your go-to Final Fantasy deck?
Uh, the one, so I think it was the Cloud Sephiroth 2-pack,
Mm-hmm.
and there was I think it was the Sephiroth side of it that had the Kadaj war drop that, like, when it comes into play, removes a guy from the game, and then he removes himself from play and comes back every turn and just kills things every time.
Yeah, and the only counter to it
As
is
far as a
the
precon,
white Aerith is the only counter to it. Yeah, the black Kadaj.
I mean,
Yeah.
that seems too good to be in a precon. Like way too good to be in a precon.
There's a lot of good cards in those. Like those Final Fantasy starters are a great product because not like you get a full play set of all the starter exclusive cards, and they'll reprint old like legendary and heroics from like other sets that help facilitate whatever that is, right? So if you get like the Final Fantasy, like the Scion of the Seventh Dawn, like the Final Fantasy 14 2-player starter, there's cards from the older sets that work with that are like heroic and legendaries that like they have no problem doing that. So it makes it like
That's very cool.
it's not just, oh, here's a bunch of cards. It's they throw together decks that you can actually, they might not be the best, but you can easily upgrade them and they're functional. You understand what they're trying to do with that deck when you play it.
It seems like that's becoming the thing more and more. I'm still, I guess, locked in my trauma of all the years where card game companies sold us garbage precons. So my assumption is always that the pre-constructed decks are always completely unplayable, a waste of your time. Scavenge the 4 good cards that are in it that you need, and the rest, and that's just not the case anymore. Like I need to be more prepared for precons to actually be powerful out of the box, I guess.
The Final Fantasy ones I think they do an awesome job of. We're way off topic here, but I think it's are. It's at least worth discussing when you're talking about starter product, right? And what a good starter product is. So, Final Fantasy does a really good job of introducing the core engine for a deck in their starters for a competitive deck. So there was the Shin Reverse Avalanche 2-player starter. That Avalanche,
I like that one a lot.
The Avalanche core is great. All you need to do is you need like a Barrett and a Tifa, right? That you can find on TCG Player super cheap. Add those to that deck, and all of a sudden you have a competitively viable deck, right? The new Final Fantasy 13 custom starter is a great base for a currently very good competitive deck. So and they have done the thing successfully so far, where every card is easily accessible and all the chase cards are the alt arts. So you can upgrade those decks cheap to get to that competitive level.
I think that's cool.
I think it's cool too, and that's what I want for Star Wars Unlimited, right? We get Luke and Vader.
Again, I have no shade to throw at FFTCG by saying I don't build my own decks for it. Like, I'm a fan, but I mean, I build versus decks like every day, basically. So
those don't really come with precons.
There's only so many hours in the day.
They give you deck lists, but you don't necessarily have precons. It's here's the cards, have fun, right? And a lot of the times, I mean, I don't know. Well, other than like the Civil War box and the 2-player boxes, like you can't play with that. So you have to deck build, really.
Yeah, that's true. The cards don't come in such a way that you could just open them and go, which is potentially a criticism. Precons, I think, serve a really important role in card games, like getting people to the table. But again, we're far afield from the purpose of this show today. Yeah. And we more or less hit my whole list of stuff. So I guess unless you have anything else, man, we can probably start to wrap things up.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
All right. Well, I guess it was a pleasure hanging out with you, man. Glad we were able to get together and chat about some Star Wars Unlimited. And until next time, we'll see you in the arenas.